All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the security rabbit hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast, part 3 in what turned out to be a trilogy, thanks to Jay, on vulnerability scoring management and the like. This is Raph. I'm here with you on a beautiful the day before Thanksgiving, November 26th. In beautiful 2025, where it's 64 degrees outside. Jay, where are you at? And is it warm or cold?
I'm in Minnesota and it's 29 degrees.
Oh, screw that. Yeah,
So,
no, thank you. Hard pass. Hard pass. Hey, so you guys, you've been following the other two episodes. We had Brian on. We had our friend Arsenic, who started the entire kerfuffle, as we like to say. This is his fault if you're yelling at you spent some time yelling at your phone or your headphones, or your dash in the case some folks don't drive angry. But this is a topic that's necessary to explore. Like, we really need to go into this and spend some time on it. And Jay hit me up on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I've got something to add to this." He wanted to talk about EPSS, and I figured, yeah, I mean, what else do we want to do? So, Jay Jacobs, welcome to the show, man. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, my third appearance. I don't know if that's a record or not, but
nah, there's been I mean, after 4, you become a semi-regular. Although it has been a minute. You've been on. Hold on, you messaged me, and I need to go figure it out. Like,
I went back and looked.
It's been a while.
Yeah, 7 years since I've been on.
Episode 80 in 2014. Episode 297 in 2018.
Yep.
And yeah, okay, so it's been a while.
Yeah, and what's interesting, that one in 2018, we talked about some of the precursor research that led into EPSS.
Yeah.
So
I remember that was a very interesting conversation around the I think we called it the psychology or something behind scoring vulnerabilities. So all right, talk me through where are you? What are you doing now? And then we'll get into it.
So right now I'm working at a company I started. I'm one of the founders at Empirical Security. Just took our seed round and we're busy building. And other than that, I'm running the EPSS effort, the whole project, and also leading the special interest group through first.org. I'm also involved in the CVE program, and I'm a co-chair on a newly formed consumer working group for CVE records. So that's, I think, all I'm up to.
Do you need like the extra 27 hours in a day, or like how do you get through all that? It's a lot of work, dude.
Yeah, I don't really watch TV, and insomnia can sometimes be a blessing and a curse. But yeah,
I've got the opposite. I can sit down on the couch for 2 seconds. As soon as my head gets comfortable, night.
Yeah.
So all right. So talk to me about EPSS, because we spent some time with Rob talking about it. So let's hear your take on it, because I'm curious now.
Yeah, and I mean, clearly I've got bias about it because I created it. But I think the important thing to think about EPSS is that there's nothing unique about it. Like, it's science. Like, that's it. It's just standing on the shoulder of giants, as the quote goes. It is like, when people learn about data science and machine learning and modeling, like, this is a textbook example of supervised learning. You go get the thing that you want to predict, and then you get as much of that as possible, and then you get some attributes and some features about what you're looking at, and then you put those two together in a model and you create it. Like, that is EPSS in a nutshell.
So I've heard all models are bad, some are useful. I love that quote.
Absolutely. Yeah. George Box said that quote. Yes. And I mean, basically, that is probably one of the number one. Well, I mean, there's like a 5-way tie for number one bad criticisms about this. But that's one of the criticisms, that, like, hey, this model is imperfect, therefore we should throw it out. Right? Yeah. Like, the model is useful. It is not perfect. And that's one of the things that I often talk about. Like, I get on stage and I'm like, look, this is not perfect. Just take that notion, get it out of your head. This is not perfect. And the only way to evaluate it is to compare to any other option you have available. right? So you want to compare it to CVSS. If you got homegrown, whatever risk analysis for vulns, compare it to that. If you've got, Qualys score, Tenable score, whatever other vendor score, throw that in the mix, compare it to that. And that's how you evaluate it.
So listen, we've been trying this vulnerability management thing for a hot minute. Like I remember being the poor schlep that had to go look through the bug track and anti-bug track and all the mailing lists and identify things that may or may not be relevant. I mean, there were mailing lists everywhere. You had to sign up for all of them. People started collecting them at one point and then offering that as a service. That was great until you realize that your list was slightly different, and then became like, well, I don't agree with that score. I don't agree that that's high, medium, low. And I think that's kind of where everything went. Look, this is. Let me ask this: Is the whole idea of scoring vulnerabilities and patching, is it all subjective? And like, if it is, then does any of this conversation even matter?
So if it's subjective, I would agree. And honestly, I mean, like in anything we're talking about, there's a range, right? That is never black and white. It's all gray. So even if you try to make it 100% objective, subjectivity is going to creep into it. So no, I mean, like, I don't think so if you take something like CVSS, which is largely subjective, right? They pick out some things that they think are important. Then in the CVSS group, they would, I don't know if you know how they develop the scores, but they would look at two different vectors and say which one should be scored higher. They don't say how much higher, anything like that. And they do that across a whole bunch of pairs. And then they try to develop the math that would fit the most pairs, right?
Yeah. That's the part that feels like it
clearly
starts to have an issue.
Clearly subjective, right? So, but then what is an alternative? How do we get to objective? The first thing you want to do is look for things being exploited, right? In the other podcast, you talked about Kev list, the known exploited vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
That's a great set of ground truth, right? So if you know something is being exploited, I guess the question would be like, if you knew it was exploited last week, do you want to patch it moving forward?
Right. That's always a good one. It's like the flu It's like the flu shot, right? Hey, here's what we had last year. Yeah. Hopefully the new one this year won't be too bad.
Similar.
At least we'll get last year's.
So the answer is like, it's probably a pretty good tactic. But also it's not infallible. I think it was Arsnake said something like the topic of prediction came up. And this is one of the challenges that I get, that like, hey, you're trying to predict sentient people. And I think I wrote the quote down because it was what Arsnake said. And nothing, like, I love Arsnake and his work should speak on its own. But he said, where is it? These are sentient. Oh boy, I had it like right here. Too sentient. Here we go. These are sentient adversaries, so they can shift on a whim. They can shift just because they had a Diet Coke, right? So I don't think it is predictable. So like, if we're saying that, right, they're sentient beings and it's not predictable, then why even do a Kev list? Like, why, like saying it's not predictable, but you should patch everything on a Kev, saying like, that's now predictable, right? Like, that is an oxymoron just right in your face. Like, it's not predictable, but go do this method, right? Like everything we're talking about is prediction here. There is nothing you can say that's not trying to predict the future.
That's right. And this is sort of like part tarot card reading, part what's the movie? I can't think of it right now. Tom Cruise.
Well, so
you know what I'm talking about,
the Minority Report thing?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. No, I would disagree. I don't think there's any tarot card or crystal ball here. So like what I try to do with EPSS, and this is one of the valid criticisms, is the data that we use for EPSS are sensor data, right? So it's like IDS, honeypots, IPS, any sort of firewall blocking that lists it, EDR systems, malware detection when we know they're associated with vulnerabilities, and it's temporal. Like we know the timing. And this is really critical because like let's say back on August 1st, I said, here's my scores, right? I just scored 300,000 vulnerabilities. Here are my scores. Then you could say like, hey, that's tarot card reading. You're just trying to predict the future. But then what if we wait a month, look at everything that happened and say, how did we do? Right?
That's an interesting thing. So the review part of it is interesting.
Yeah. And this is how modeling works. I mean, like, people say history, how can history predict the future? Well, you go back in history, look at your predictions and see how they did. Like you go and measure them. So there's no tarot card reading. There's no crystal ball. It's like, hey, how does this predict the future?
Okay. So and I suspect I know the answer to this because I know what I would say, but are adversaries in any way? So this is kind of come back to, are our adversaries predictable? And I'll qualify that by saying there are different tiers of adversaries, right? There's some that are absolutely predictable, and it's a range. There's some that are predictable, and then there's some that like their goal is not to be predictable. But on the whole, where do you find? Right. What do you think?
So they are. I mean, think about it. Like our consumer credit system would be terrible if we couldn't predict human sentience. Like that, we build that on people's likelihood to default on loans, to pay back their credit. Like that is all trying to predict, the fraud detection, like there are so many different areas trying to predict this. And the other thing is like an extreme example, like I'm thinking of like the mentalists on a stage where they're predicting how people will think and they prime them and they do all these things. Marketing as an entire industry wouldn't exist if you couldn't predict how people react and do, right? I mean, like trying to predict. And the other thing, get me all worked up, Raph. This is one of the things that Marcus Random back in the day and I would go back and forth on prediction and things like this. And he was like, all right. And Marcus Random was very skeptical. And he's like, all right, tell me the next breach, right? Tell me what is it going to be? And I'd always say like, I can't predict the next breach, but I can describe the next 1,000 breaches. Like I can tell you what the next 1,000 will look like with pretty good accuracy, plus or minus, but I can't tell you the next one. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say, hey, I can't tell you exactly which vulnerability is going to be exploited, but we can talk about probability. We can talk about approximation of risk, exposure across all of these. Some are clearly more risky, more of a problem than others. Let's call those out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I used to like Marcus made a comment one time about like how he sets up. He doesn't look for because he traveled a lot. And he said, in my house, I don't have an alarm system to check for open doors or windows because sometimes my neighbors come over and like feed my cat. He goes, however, my cat's not allowed to smoke my cigars. So if my humidor opens or like my gun safe opens while I'm not at home, that's a problem, right? It's like what are the things that shouldn't happen? And that kind of stuff sticks with me because you go from trying to get into the head of somebody like what could they possibly do across the entire space of the possible versus like what's useful to them and what could be the most useful, and that's in a particular given situation. That narrows down your ability to say what's the next step or where's the starting point.
Yeah, but also I mean like think of it this way. So like when we talk about vulnerabilities, if you have something like a complex buffer overflow and you've got a system that has complex buffer overflow, or it has a relatively simple SQL injection that you don't even need to find exploit code for or write exploit code for, you just go exploit it. Which one is the attacker going to go after, right? Now, you can't say 100%. There is no 100% here.
Right.
You could probably say majority of the time, I don't know, 80, 90% of the time, 95, 98% of the time, they're going to go after the SQL injection. Right.
Yeah. Lower effort, so, right? Lower effort for the same results. You go for the easier. Yeah. I mean, I know what I do.
And that's human nature, right? I mean, we're predicting the sentient reaction to a set of variables placed in front of them.
Yeah. So how do we solve the problem of the problem space? Because like we talked about the whole CVE issue, right? Some things don't have a CVE number. There's vulnerabilities that, sometimes fall through the cracks. There's hundreds of thousands of them out there. Like, how do you make sense? How do you make sense of all that? Because there's if the way we bring them into a scoring system is flawed, then the scoring system I don't think matters as much, because
Right.
that's like saying, I made ice cream. It's not perfect, but the milk was spoiled a week ago, so like maybe don't eat the ice cream.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do we solve this? So first, I feel very confident in saying we don't. Right. This is not solvable. It is manageable, though. Right. We can do things that will make things better tomorrow than they were today.
That's
we
fair.
can do things. And so, like, if you take the problem of CVE expansion, like we're getting, I don't know, 40,000 a year now. I just did a calculation. It's 1 every 11 minutes, 24 hours a day for the last 365 years.
Absolutely bonkers.
11 minutes. And so, like, if the only way we can process those is to have someone go and look at them, that's not going to work. It's not going to scale. It's going to become crazy expensive. So what can we do with machines? How do we look at that data from a machine perspective? And so this is partly what EPSS does. EPSS is 100% automated. So like, hey, let's go scour the web. Who's talking about it? What blog posts are being written? What is the general message of those blogs? How many tweets are out there about it? How many LinkedIn posts? Whatever it is. What is the actual attributes of that vulnerability? Do we see any exploit code published anywhere? All of these things add up. Right? They're all sort of nudging us in certain directions. None of them are infallible. And I think Arsenic pointed out that they generally don't overlap. And this is okay. I mean, like, this is reality, right? And the way that we go after it is with science, with modeling, to say, here's the outcome.
I'm okay with doing better tomorrow than we did today. Chasing perfection, as far as I'm concerned, is in the history of time, has always ended in misery, right? You just end up tired and pissed. And sometimes that too. How do you I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase this. How do you create the type of algorithm that doesn't lend itself to being manipulated by an attacker that knows about something that they're going to use or something, and then make sure that it either the sleight of hand, like the misdirection, look over here. Yeah. Never mind what I'm doing over here. How do you eliminate? Can you eliminate that?
No,
Can you compensate?
No, but I mean, with or without modeling, isn't that a problem? I mean, like, if you take science and math out of the equation, and this is another thing that comes up, a lot of the criticism around EPSS, they're saying, well, you don't have all the data. And I'd be like, well, do you? I mean, like, I go out and grab stuff, like, or they're like, how do you make sense of this? And I'm like, well, how do you make sense of it? Do you look at it and like guess? I mean, like, and it's all, that goes back to the relative thing. So if people want to do, are you talking about like a data poisoning attack where like they know this data is coming in, so they go and mess with that data kind of thing?
Yeah. So like the whole, the really good, so I love models. That's one of the things I'm actually really like makes me excited. Like, I love modeling things, right? Behaviors, events, prediction is always interesting, but and then what I do for a day job. But so if you think about like when you're building a model, you want to be able to have enough variables without overlap, or with small enough overlap, so that somebody trying to manipulate one side of the model doesn't ruin the whole model, right? It doesn't. You don't want to, like, the way you weight things, the way it interacts with the other components of that model. You want to make sure that like it's pretty resilient to, we'll say, use the word tampering for lack of a better, or poisoning for lack of a better term.
Yeah, definitely. And people have tried to do this. There's been 2 different cases where people tried to put a bunch of tweets out about vulnerabilities and see if that affected the EPSS score. And there was one that did that, and then did a bunch of other sources that like EPSS wasn't even looking at. And they tried to claim that there was a correlation between changing these other things and EPSS. Anyway. But yeah, I mean, like, that is very true that you can go out. But again, like, we're talking about sentient beings. Would an attacker do that? Like, you have to do it sort of a concerted effort on one vulnerability to either artificially raise it, and it's a lot easier to raise it than lower it. And so, like, I mean, there's, like we talked about, every 11 minutes there's a new one. Why would you spend time trying to artificially inflate one score? I mean, like, yes, it's totally possible. Almost any model has this challenge, but that's one of the reasons that every data source we look at, we consider that option. So like we're looking at Metasploit. People could, I guess, in theory, submit a bad Metasploit module, but it would be removed a few days later, probably with people review it.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like that. You have to really consider that stuff, and it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, I just every 11 is
every 11
like
minutes,
several hundreds. Yeah, that's insane. Like that is.
Yeah, and so but you can't go through them. Yeah,
yeah. So how do we do? I mean, how do we make sense? Is it okay to make sense of a subset and then draw a conclusion about the stuff that you're not seeing? So basically, here's what I'm saying, right? You can say, okay, it's Patch Tuesday. There are 2 criticals, 50 mediums, and a bunch of lows. That's we can say with fairly high confidence that that's not the totality, right? There's always stuff floating around that's not disclosed well, or not disclosed on time, or simply not disclosed.
Right.
Is it enough to say if I can get the things that are potentially troublesome based on a model that I trust, EPSS being one of them, is that good enough?
Let me take it a slightly different direction. So like one of the things that EPSS does really well is it treats those vulnerabilities with exploitation activity as a sample. Okay. Right. So if we know if there's a vulnerability and we know it's being exploited, we know that it's being exploited, right? But if it's not being exploited, there's no way we can say it's not being exploited. We simply don't know if it's being exploited. So those are the 2 options that we have with exploitation. We either know it's exploited or we don't know. So what we do is we look at those being exploited and say, what does this corpus of vulnerabilities look like? And this is what EPSS does. And then it says, all right, we're looking at this corpus, and then I'm going to grab this vulnerability and say, how does this look more like the corpus being exploited or the corpus that we don't know about? And that's how it does that. So there are things in EPSS rated extremely high with no exploitation activity at all. And so the question is, well, are we just missing that? Is that actually being exploited and our sensors aren't picking it up?
That's people say, like, what keeps you up at night about this? You get that question, like, what keeps you up at night? In all of cybersecurity for the last long time that I've been doing this, like, it's not the things that we know about that, like, there's a bad thing coming, we've seen it, quick patch against it. That's not what I'm concerned about. It's the stuff that you're like, something weird happened. We're not entirely sure what. But something weird happened. That's what worries me. It's like when you're driving down the road, right? The analogy for me to this is you're driving down the road, your check engine light comes on, and then like your dash on the new cars in your entertainment system will tell you, hey, you've got a slip in your fan belt. Your port 2 is misfiring. As opposed to, like, the light comes on, you slow down, the light goes off. And you put the gas back on, nothing happens. You let the gas off, it comes back on. You're like, what? And then it goes off for a while. You're like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Like, that's the one I'm concerned about. Because, like, what is going on? The unknown scares the hell out of me in this industry because there's so much of it. And
I think to add to that, another problem in vulnerability management is related but very different. It's the things that we think we know that aren't true.
Oh, God.
So like we think, like, CVSS has been a big topic in the other 2 podcasts. Yeah. Like CVSS, a lot of people think that is really good. And, I definitely agree with everybody else talking about it so one of the things I would say that CVSS is a very weak signal. Very weak signal. The podcast that we talked about in 2018, we talked about this CVSS being slightly better than random, than a dice roll.
Yeah, right? I remember that.
But it's still better. It's still better. So like, it's still got this tiny little signal. So to say it's worthless or bad or whatever, like, that's not quite accurate. It's just really weak. Like it's got a really, so like you want to treat it not with like a whole pound of salt, you know, like not a grain of salt, a whole pound of salt. And so it's really weak, but like that's really important. But like the things that we think we know, but are absolutely not true, like CVSS, some of these old things, or thinking like, I am an expert, I can go look at this and I can pick out those being exploited. I'm pretty sure the answer is nobody can do that.
Yeah.
Like no one person is going to be capable of that. We have to do a wisdom of the crowd thing and really look at a whole bunch of things and do our best guess effort, you know, best looking at all of this data. And there's no one person that can look at it and be like, I got it.
Yeah.
You know?
This is a, you know, comes down to the philosophical question. Is it better to be wrong or better not to know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, luckily vulnerability management, like what everyone else was saying, like a very small proportion are being exploited, very small.
Yeah.
So like, if you're wrong, you're probably not going to know, you know? So like, if you don't know, it's probably going to see the same outcome, you know? I mean, statistically speaking. So
yeah, that when the numbers get that high, statistics fall, you know, you get that like, what do you call it? Is it the law of small numbers applies? Like, you know, there's a couple of things in there, but when that one hits you, it's really like, that's really bad. Like 99.998%, you can be like, oh, who dodged a bullet. On that 0.001, you're like, what?
Yeah. But, and so back to the CVSS thing, like over 50% are high and critical, you know, of all the published CVEs, you know, independent of version and all the other mess with that. But I mean, like if you go to a company and you're like, hey, here's this metric, all high and critical, you know, like PCI, for example, and the PCS go high and critical, go fix all of these. And it's literally over half of them. And like the research we did at Kenna, we found that companies on average per month were closing 15 to 20% of their open vulns. And you're saying, got to fix half. You know, I mean, like that is a major expense.
So even at 20%, you're creating a backlog every time you go.
Maybe
like you're not decreasing the pile.
We found about 2/3 of the companies were decreasing their pile.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, they don't show up at the same for every company. You know, so fair. So like if you can get 20%, generally you're going to be knocking it down. You know.
Okay.
So
man, but the sheer volume of the things coming at us,
so
it makes it so difficult to like, if you're wrong, you know. So Rob's whole thing is he comes back to like, are we reducing risk, right? Are we doing things that actually reduce risk? Like philosophically, I want to say yes, but if somebody says prove it, that's when it gets really tough.
Yeah. So like, let's look at that for a second. How would you prove it? Let's say in a perfect world, how would you prove it? Well, I can answer that if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead. Because I've got a crappy answer that probably won't make very much sense.
You want to find feedback, right? I mean, plain and simple, look for the feedback. So in one case, like if you're one organization, you may not get good feedback. Like you're going to look for breaches, or you might look for near misses. So like going to what EPSS uses, the IDS, IPS, what are people trying to exploit in your environment? Things getting triggered and or blocked. You know, that's one signal you could use for feedback. And in reality, you'd want to look at a whole bunch of companies and look at what they're seeing. You know, hopefully go to KevLists or things, you know, talking about DFIR reports, what's being exploited. Here's the challenge though. Like I was up in front of a vulnerability conference and I said this thing and I'm like, all right, we've got a Kev list. Like if you look at CISA Kev, there's like 1,200 vulns on there. It started 3-4 years ago. Out of the 1,200, how many do you think will be exploited in the next 30 days? Like looking forward, how many, right?
How do you answer that question?
Exactly. I mean, like I can, because I'm looking at the data and I've looked at the last sets of 30 days, stuff like that. And it's according to the data I was looking at, it was about 60% of those would be exploited. And this is, you know, things that might be 3-4 years old on the list.
Okay.
So about 60% we would see activity for in the next 30 days. But here's the thing. I'm talking to a room full of vulnerability management experts. The whole conference was about vulnerabilities. Nobody had an answer. Like, what are we doing wrong there? you know?
But that doesn't surprise me, Jay. Like the whole
It doesn't surprise me either, but that's wrong.
No, yeah, obviously, but we've done vulnerability management for 20, 30 years based on this came out, somebody said this was high, ergo I must do this.
Yeah.
Where I think it gets really, even if you have a really good, like, okay, let's say EPSS is the best there is. Okay, let's put
It's
that
not,
up.
but yeah.
Let's say there was the best option there was.
Yeah.
That is looking at broadly organizations, right? How do each market segment and each company has a different risk and threat profile, right? Their threat models are fundamentally different. Now, you could say all banking shares a set of attributes, but like maybe bank A has a CEO that really likes to antagonize the alt-right or the alt-left, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe really likes to poke his finger into the animal loving crowd because he hunts big game or something, or she does something crazy. So you're like, okay, all banks have this profile, but you over here, you've got like, you're raised. Okay. So what is it in addition to this that you have to look out for? And I think that's where it gets really weird. Like, what kind of legacy software do we have? What kind of business does that transact? If that goes dead, what happens? What are the business processes that we have stacked on top? And I think from in the history that I spent in the space, actually doing the work hands on keyboard, that's the problem. Not arguably it's dated a bit, but arguably that's the hardest thing for us to do is say, if I say this is a 10, known exploited, being exploited in the wild right now.
Yep.
For the world at large, what does that mean in terms of dollar risk for my business? What's stacked on top of it? What goes through it? It's because we look at it and say that's just it's a Solaris box, or it's a, well, God, that's dating.
Yeah.
Let's pretend I didn't say that. That's a Linux box or a Windows machine or a Mac or whatever, right?
Yeah.
What happens on that?
So I don't want to go into it too much, but you're making a plug for the company that I just founded to get into that local environment. How do we get into a local environment? Look at the products and the data and the threats and the controls and everything about that to be able to give a much more precise modeling output on the problems they're seeing.
And I think that's where I think the tech and the algorithms and the research has advanced enough to where the shift needs to happen, the advancements that need to happen, the innovation that we need to happen in this space is on the business side. Right?
Yeah.
Because even if you take the most cutting edge AI driven, next gen, predictable, close, say you get 30% predictability, which is arguably pretty damn good, right? Mm-hmm. But you know like which exploits will be used next. Great. Does that matter to you? And if it does, how much? And is it worth taking that server that does something, we're not quite sure what, down? Well, that server costs us about $1 million an hour for the things that it does.
Right.
How long does that patch take to apply and then test and validate? How much money are we losing versus how much could we lose? Like that's always that equation is what's the trade-off? Because it's always a trade-off.
Right. Yeah, always. So like one of the things that you mentioned that I think is super interesting is we're getting into the actual data and we're doing the research and looking at what matters. I think when you have, people talk about the crown jewels, that thing that you mentioned, if you take it down, it's $1 million an hour or whatever. If you think about what we're seeing in vulnerability exploitation, it's typically the initial access point, right? This is the initial access is vulnerability exploitation. The crown jewels is not the initial access point. So the fact that we're looking at the crown jewels and we see it's segmented, it's got, this in front of it, it's got these tools running, it's got, the probability of that particular vulnerability being exploited, especially given that it's mainly initial access, pretty low, right? So maybe that's just fine. And you could put other compensating controls and or if you know you've got a system like that, I imagine you better have some failover so you could take down one leg of the production system, patch that, and then go over to the next leg and the next. I mean, that's how modern systems work, you know. So
Yeah.
I think, but you have to be able to take the whole context into consideration, which is really, really difficult. But the good thing is that most companies have that context sitting in the data now. So all of these security tools are creating, they have, you know, APIs and logs, and they're generating all of this data. It's just generally not being looked at. They're not being ingested, and they're certainly not being combined with other security tools to see what the big picture is. So I think that's where we need to go with science.
That's a good point. That is a really good point. Is the combination of information together.
Yes.
That really makes this make sense, because otherwise it's just more signal that isn't. We've talked about, okay, there's a lot of noise. How do you separate the signal from the noise? But then how do you make the signal make sense in context and in priority?
Yeah.
And I think as the industry kind of evolves, assuming we continue to evolve and get better, I think there's, you know, context, priority, and then the part of that context is what is that risk that it affects. And I have seen some very interesting and complicated risk formulas.
Yeah.
And I will go to my grave saying this: the more complicated it is, the less good it's going to be. Now, you know, it's not that like A plus B equals risk, right? That's not how the world works. But the minute you start getting into like having to write a document that explains the interaction of the variables with the timing of the tides and the moon phase, and like you're like, this isn't working the way you think it is, right? It's simplicity and the ability to replicate your logic to make it make sense to somebody that doesn't do what we do.
Yeah.
Because we don't do what they do. And that's a necessary thing. Right. So I keep saying, make it make sense.
Yeah. But I would also push back on that, because I think actually the problem with risk modeling, especially in our industry, is that people consider this a security problem. Yeah. And it absolutely is not a security problem. This is a risk problem. Okay. And risk is statistics. It is analysis of observable empirical information, and how do you interpret that? That is statistics at its core. So if you want to study risk, you do not go study security, you go study statistics.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so the main problem that you're citing, when you see risk models and they're more complex, they're probably developed by a security person or someone related to the field, probably very low training in statistics, and they're generating models that like Benjamin Franklin was promoting back in his day, you know, of like, I'm going to develop some things I think are important. I'm going to give it a 3, a 5, have some interaction with this. Like, this is super, super antiquated, terrible statistical methods that's been proven time and time again not to work. So that is our risk modeling. Yeah. And I think the challenge that we have is that risk is by nature entirely complex. And you cannot solve complex problems with simple models. So the models by nature have to be complex, but they have to be right. They can't be done by someone who's just making it complex because it feels right to them.
That's the key. That's the key. And if it moves the needle, we have to be able to explain why and in which direction, right? Because otherwise, again, this is just, I really do wonder.
That why thing is something I struggle with, because it's like, you know, if I watch a weather forecast and they're like, hey, it's going to snow. It just snowed here last night. I'm not going to be like, you know what? I don't believe you. Why? Why are you saying that? You know, give me all of the data that you've collected. I want to see it. But that's what happens in security. We say, hey, this thing is risky. And people are like, why? Prove it to me. And I get it, because in security, we've been burned over and over again with really crappy models. So like, why is a totally valid question, but it shouldn't. We should be able to have trust in these models and prove them other way than like, here's the data. Like if I give you all the data, sorry, I'm rambling.
The weatherman says, I'm using, you know, a weather modeling platform that tells me X and Y. Now,
Right.
we all know the weather's always wrong, and I'm pretty sure they're just guessing somewhere in the back with supercomputers. Because, but look, all jokes aside, like that's a super complex thing. And if you told me, if I asked, hey, why is it going to be cloudy tomorrow? You're gonna be like, if I showed you, you'd have no idea what you're looking at.
Right.
Trust me, this is the model I'm using. Here's my track record for that model.
Yeah.
And you know what they do, that the weather people tell us that security doesn't tell us. Here's a degree of confidence in my analysis, in my output.
Right. Yeah.
I am like 50% chance of rain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the output of EPSS is a probability. Just saying. And so with that,
better than not.
Right. And so with that probability, though, you can combine it with mathematical sound properties. So you can look at one asset, combine all the vulnerabilities on there and ask, what is the probability one or more of these may be exploited in the next 30 days? Any one of these might be exploited.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good enough. You've given me hope that Rob took away.
Yeah.
And Brian set fire to. So I feel like, listen, in cyber, nobody ever agrees on anything, because then you wouldn't stand out enough. But I think I spent some time on EPSS on the website to before we started recording, because I want to actually understand what in the heck we're going to be talking about. And so like if you can, when you can show me the track record for something and say, I have, the accuracy of this thing is, we're within 2 points in either direction 80% of the time. Like, what was the line? 60% of the time, it works 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Like, as long as you can tell me relatively, my confidence in what I'm saying is this, and I've been right. That many times.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in EPSS, we actually talk about two different metrics, because just talking about how right are you, you're going to miss part of the picture. So we talk about you can Google precision and recall. There's a nice Wikipedia page on it, but we call it efficiency and coverage. So like efficiency is how efficient is your spend. Let's say you say, I want to patch these 100 vulnerabilities this month. Out of that 100, how right were you? Let's say, we saw activity on 30% of them. So you're 30% efficient, right? The other one is coverage. And that is, out of everything we saw exploited or with activity in the next month, how many of those did you prioritize? So if you only prioritize 100 and say, 2 out of the 1,000 that were exploited were in that 100, you have a 2% coverage rate, right? So you got, how well did you spend your money and how well did you do your security? And those are two different metrics.
That coverage metric is really good.
That's what people focus on when they want good security. They're focusing on coverage. I want to make sure I'm remediating the things that will be exploited in the next month.
Yeah.
You wait a month and see how they did, right?
That helps you. That helps you track whether you're spending money wisely.
Yep. And in EPSS, because it's a continuous score between 0 and 1 or 0 and 100%, you're going to get a different coverage and efficiency metric depending on where you set your threshold.
Okay.
So like if you say I want to patch 50% and above, you're going to have a specific coverage and efficiency metric at that threshold. And I've always resisted giving high, medium, low, critical, whatever to these scores, because that's a threshold. That's like your tolerance thing. Yeah. I'm not going to set that for you. And it's only one part. This is only measuring threat. This doesn't have anything to do with your, how many controls or where things are, like none of that. So I'm not giving you a high, medium, low. Here's the thing. So what we end up with is we've got a chart of coverage and efficiency, and you see a line that paints a line of, if you have a threshold, you're going to get this point here, but across the whole range, you're going to get a line through coverage and efficiency.
That's interesting.
And so
that is actually, I think that's actually useful, Jay. That's actually useful, because perfect is the enemy of good. But if you're good, you want to know how good.
Yeah. And I mean, for that reason, when we look at where that line is, it is not perfect. Right. Like I cannot stress that enough. But like we can create that line for CVSS. If we get tenable scores, we can create that line for tenable scores. All of those things, we can look at that same thing. We can plot it for SysKev as our output variable. Screw all my data. Let's do it for SysKev.
Yeah, fair enough.
So we can do stuff like that and look at how these scores perform. The other thing too I want to mention quick is that EPSS is on version 4 right now. And so we've gone through 4 versions. The first version was slightly better than CVSS. It had 16 variables in it, right? And you can see the line and it sort of drops down. And it's, CVSS is here and then EPSS is sort of here, slightly above it. And so then we got version 2 and it jumped up more to the middle because we're getting a lot more variables. We went to like a full machine learning model. The first one was intended for a spreadsheet, so we kept it simple. But we went to a centralized API. Version 2 had a big jump up in coverage and efficiency. Version 3 had an even more jump up because we started getting more and more features, more data in there. There's a whole huge data collection framework behind EPSS, getting all this data. And now in version 4, we actually dropped down a little bit, but we saw version 3, as we're plotting that line over time, we see it sort of decay just slightly, and it got about halfway down to where version 2 was, version 3 did. And then we retrained it and it bumped back up a little bit.
Interesting.
So that's the thing about EPSS, like it is evolving. We're continually adding, we're shooting to retrain every year now. So we should be EPSS 5, probably early March. That's what we're aiming for.
Okay. Well, cool, man. Hey, thanks for spending all this time. This is good 40, 45 minutes of like insight that I didn't have before. So I'm glad I have. It's been far too long since you've been on last.
Yeah.
And by the way, thanks for following the podcast. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and congratulations on hundreds and hundreds of episodes. That is insane to me.
Approaching 700 times that we've hit the record button. That's it's funny. I somebody asked, and I've said this a couple of times. What keeps you going? And like on Monday afternoons and Monday evenings, if I don't sit down at my laptop and do some editing, like I feel like something's wrong. For me, it's like not going like if like Sunday comes and goes and we don't go to church. I'm like, wait. Did we have a Sunday? Like what happened here? Yeah. Like, so if I'm not posting, if I'm not doing this, like something feels off. So this is just a part of my life now that like it's older than my kids. So, at some point, I don't know, at some point, maybe this goes away when I go away, but maybe somebody picks it up and keeps going. I've had people try to buy the asset itself. I'm not keen on inserting ads into conversation. I think it kind of screws things. I have a bunch of favorite podcasts I listen to. That's like every time the commercial comes on, like 30 seconds skip, 30 seconds skip, 30 seconds skip. You're like, that's annoying. That was a great part of the conversation. Why would you do that? Yeah. So, that's right. This has a mind of its own. It's going to keep growing. I appreciate you. Being on the show.
Congratulations.
Folks that listen. All right, folks, thank you so much for listening. This has been Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast 682, I think. We are far down the rabbit hole at this point. Maybe this is a trilogy. Maybe we bring them all. Maybe I get you guys on one more time and we just have a big debate on how to make everybody sing Kumbaya, or maybe not. But anyway. Thanks for joining, folks. If you do this for a living, you're trying to make sense of this. I hope this has been helpful. I hope it's been useful. And like we said, all models are bad, but some of them are useful. And I think I like where you're going with it. I like the fact that you're going to keep retraining it every year. And I hope that trend line keeps going up and up and up, up and to the right, as they say, up and to the right.
Yep.
All right, folks, it's been great. I'll see you guys next time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. We'll see you later. Ciao. Bye-bye.